The On Target Institute presents small group leadership and facilitation training, exploring practical methods to start, facilitate, and lead all types of small group ministry. Now with today's session, On Target founder Vince Dacchioli.
Hello, men, and welcome again to our OTI leadership training session number 9. We've been dealing with counterproductive roles and group dynamics, and this is our third session on that topic. In our last one, we dealt with the silent guy. This time, we're going to be dealing with the one agenda guy. Let's peek in. Okay, let's move on to the one agenda guy. Who's going to be the one agenda guy? Okay, Danny's the one agenda guy. Now, here's a guy. The one agenda guy is no matter what the subject matter is, they've got the answer, and it's always the same thing. It never changes. It's one thing. Let me give you an example. Okay, guys. What do you think about this? The issues from our past that most hinder us. Any of you guys got some ideas or examples about the? Yeah, Danny, go ahead.
Well, I have a thought on it, and I'm really surprised that the lecturer didn't bring this up. But I think that when we're talking about fear, it has to do with the sin in your life. If you haven't addressed sin in your life, then you're going to have fear. As a matter of fact, with the anger issue, if you have sin in your life, then you're going to have anger in your life. Unforgiveness, if you have sin in your life, you're going to have unforgiveness. And that's all there is to it. The guilt comes from absolute sin in your life, and you haven't addressed the sin in your life. As a matter of fact, there's a big problem that Christians have, and that's the sin in their life. And in fact, as a matter of fact, non-Christians, the one problem that they have that they need to be convicted of is that they have sin in their lives. And if they would just address the sin in their lives, they'd be able to come to Christ and reach their fulfillment.
Let me understand what you're saying. Are you saying that the problem is the sin in our life?
That's precisely what I'm saying.
Now, what do you do with a guy like that? Now, remember, you've had some history with this guy, and the first thing you can do, by the way, is that at the appropriate time, you can take him aside and talk about the one issue thing. But let's say this is early in your relationship, and he is coming up with this sin in your life thing, which I'm not saying that sin in your life is not an issue, okay? We're not saying that at all. But obviously what he's doing is he's equating everything and every problem to that one issue, and we know that it can be more than that. It can be very complex, and you need to go a little bit deeper. So what are some suggestions that you would have for dealing with a guy like that? First thing you do is to very courteously interrupt him. But you've got to wait for a point in the conversation to do that. What kind of point are you going to wait for in the conversation before you interrupt him?
Taking a breath.
Well, taking a breath would be one point, but what else am I looking for? Well, in this case, he went through 4 different things. He went through fear, anger, unforgiveness, and he went through guilt. Okay, so the first thing you might look for is an opportunity to take what his message is, the sin in your life, and to take one of the things or issues he's talking about and to focus him on one issue. From that focus, then you take it from him to the broader group. Let me give you an example. He's talking about, obviously the guilt comes from sin in your life. I can understand guilt coming from sin in your life, and fear and unforgiveness. Now, maybe unforgiveness is a little bit of a stretch, let's say, maybe a little bit of a stretch. And I might say something like, well, Danny, go back to the unforgiveness thing a little bit. Have you ever been at a point where you were unforgiving? And of course, now I'm going to get him to engage a little bit more and talk more about himself. And I'm going to ask him to kind of relate that and how that had to do, but he's going to do it. He's going to show me how it had to do with sin in his life. Probably he's going to relate that. And then I'm going to corral him a little bit, and you're going to talk to me a little bit about unforgiveness. Maybe do you have an example of how unforgiveness might have been a problem for you at some point in your life with others?
Well, yes. As a matter of fact, I didn't have a good relationship with my stepfather, and there's always that little seed of resentment. That little seed of resentment was it was sin, and it was sin in my life.
Yeah.
But looking back on it, that's where that unforgiveness came from. And I think that did hold me back.
And what did your dad do was it your dad or stepdad?
My stepdad.
Your stepdad. What was it that you were unforgiving about toward him, and what happened? What did you feel something lacking in your relationship? What was it?
It was just that we didn't really have a relationship.
I see.
I think was the main thing.
And so how were you able to kind of deal with that and let that go? Was that something that was difficult for you? Are you still processing that? And how are you dealing with that?
Well, once I realized it was sin in my life, what I realized I needed to do is that if I wanted God to work through me, then I needed to let go of that.
So you just kind of let it go, give it to God?
To give it to God.
Huh. Well, Gentry, do you identify with that? Have you ever had a a point where you were very unforgiving towards someone, and can you relate to what Danny is talking about? Now, you don't have to answer, but what I've done now is I've taken him to one very narrow aspect of what he's been talking about, asked him to focus on it. I've learned a little bit more about maybe some hurt that he has. We're not going to deal with that just this very moment. We could develop that a little bit more. But now I'm bringing other people in the group into the conversation. Do you relate to that? Now, here's what you have to watch out for here. Now, there are two ways this could go. This could go sideways on you. Gentry could come back in a very soft way and say something like, well, yeah, you know, I had a problem like that too, and you know, I know that probably it does have to do with sin in my life, and there were some things that I was doing at that time, but boy, I had a tough time letting go with this. Or Gentry could come back and do what? He could challenge him. He could say, well, that's ridiculous. I mean, that's you know, now what are you getting into in the four different aspects of the group dynamic? You're getting into the harsh words and that whole thing. Well, you know, that's ridiculous, Danny. I mean, you know, to distill everything down, you know, I'm sick and tired of hearing you talk about sin in your life all the time. I mean, that can happen in a situation like this. Now, what do you do as a facilitator if all of a sudden you've got that dynamic going on in your group? It's happening right before your eyes. Gentry and Danny are now having a pretty heated discussion, you know. And what do you do?
Go get coffee.
You could take a break. Yeah, time for a break, guys. You could take a break. No, what do you do? Well, you cannot allow that. And sometimes this is the idea where, you know, the autocrat versus Democrat. Sometimes you may have to be the autocrat. You say, guys, time out. Look, we're not going to. We've already agreed, and you should have, that this is not a place where we're going to judge anybody. Okay, we need to love each other, and you know, while we all may have opinions about certain things, let's just keep this going and flowing in the direction. And you go back to the question, start all over again. By the way, guys, we're going to get to the theological guy in just a moment, but it's very important that you be careful not to have guys throwing, you know, formulas at people. You know, if you just do this, everything will be okay. You got to be careful with that, because everything doesn't distill down into a simple formula. Give us another example of a one agenda guy. What else might you do with a one agenda guy? Anybody? Yes.
Well, you might just say that, you know, Danny, that's really a great point. And then you could then say, Craig, what do you think about that? And then you don't have to even get into discussion with Danny or that, because that could create, you know, if he's been on that point for a bit, you start asking him a question about that, that's going to drag it out maybe even further. Right. So you can shortcut that by just saying.
That's good. That's a great point. And then shifting it. And Craig, what do you think about that? Now again, be careful, because no leader doesn't have a thought about that. The very nature of you being leaders is that you have opinions. I don't see too many leaders that are lacking opinions. So the challenge for us as leaders is to be careful not to want to just throw your opinion on the table, but to deflect it. And because if you continue to throw your opinion on the table, what is the group going to think of you? You're the dictator, you're the autocrat, you're being labeled, and you know, they're going to try to find ways to keep you quiet. That's right. There was another hand that went up. Yes, right over here, Jim.
Yeah, I think, Vince, if you have somebody that really is off base and you want to kind of make the point that this isn't where we want to leave here as something that we support, you know, one thing you can do is you can create a straw man, and you can say, you know, I knew a girl one time and her father raped her and she had unforgiveness, and you know, do you think that was sin in her life that caused that? Or, you know, just like, don't tell him he's wrong, but create somebody separate and give him an example, and then ask him, how would you process that?
Great example. And again, you want to at all times be courteous, but there are going to be occasions where someone's coming at you and they're theologically in error. And based on everything you've ever been taught, you know they're kind of out in left field. And there are a lot of people that are going to be like that, especially as you introduce new people, maybe people who are very awkward with Christianity, don't know much about it, and have been taught maybe in other arenas things that kind of sometimes are border on heresy. And so you have to be very careful with that. Usually your group, other people in the group will pick up on that. And again, how you deal with that is as important as that you deal with that. But sometimes if it's a very sensitive issue, you might say something like, well, Danny, I'll tell you what, that is a very interesting thing you're bringing up, but let's table that for a moment. And would you do me a favor? Could you stay after just a few moments? I'd just like to, I got a question I need to ask you and something I need to suggest to you, and then take it away from the group. If you do it with him in front of the group, what have you done? Is he going to come back next week? No, you've embarrassed him. So there may be, and that's again where you have to be careful that other people don't overstep their bounds and try to do that. And again, early on, guys, I believe it's great to have these kind of assumptions dealt with early on in your group, where you talk about these issues and say, guys, some of us are going to say some downright dumb things. You know, anybody here never said a dumb thing? I mean, we're going to do it. It's inevitable. But please, we do not want to judge. And we want to be sensitive to each other at all times. If you think another person is saying something that's out of order, you tell me, don't do it in the group. You know, try to create that kind of a tone, and I think you'll be safe. There was another hand back in the back.
Well, that's that's for a starting group, though. But don't you want to get to a point where guys can be honest with each other and say, "Hey, Fred, I think you're wrong there. I think we got to." I mean, and not in a condemning way, but hey, we're trying to get to the likeness of Christ here and all that.
You have to be able to disagree, and you guys, by the way, as leaders, got to be thick-skinned enough to have guys disagree with you. And that's another problem with leaders, is we assume that if somebody disagrees with us and if we're wrong, we're going to somehow lessen our esteem in their view as a leader. Not so. In fact, it's probably the opposite. If you were willing to say, you know what, you're right, or I'd like to talk about that some more. I never thought of it that way, but perhaps there is some adjustment that I need to make, and you do that maybe in another instance. But in all occasions, you do not want to discourage them or treat them harshly. But you do need to obviously have a place in your group discussion to disagree. Absolutely, there's no question about that.
One thing I try to establish in a group early is to say, we may disagree, but we must never dishonor one another. You know, agree, we can disagree, but we can't get vicious or, dishonor. And we must honor one another, even though we don't agree.
Okay, a lot of great information there, men. The one agenda guy. The next clip that we're going to show you is going to have to do with the teacher theologian. So stay tuned.